Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel. I'm just back from a week-long family vacation. Prior to leaving for that vacation, I had a couple of videos in the works, including the long-promised general update on my GT6 project. However, when I had some time to do recording for that video, it was very rainy outside. In fact, it had rained every day for about a week, and I was not able to get the car out of the workshop and get it out in the light to be able to take really good footage of it. I tried to shoot some footage inside the workshop, and it was dark and I didn't like it, so I decided to put that off for a little bit longer. In the interim, I went ahead and recorded a video with a much narrower focus, a focus on the rear inner fender patch panels that are available for the early Spitfires and GT6s, the so-called round tail Spitfires and GT6s. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I discovered once I began to actually disassemble the rear end of my car and began to remove some of the panels. I quickly learned some things about the repair panels that I had bought several years ago that I did not know at the time that I ordered them. I launched this channel because I have a lot of experience working on Spitfires, working on a Spitfire in particular, and keeping it running and researching parts and things like that. So I feel like I have enough experience to do this, but I've been very clear from the outset that I also am going to inevitably parade my ignorance about a variety of different things. With the GT6 project, it is the first time that I've actually pulled apart the body of a Spitfire or a GT6, and I've learned things that I definitely did not previously know or understand, even when I immediately started ordering replacement panels in those early days after doing an initial assessment of my GT6. So let me go ahead and set up what I'm talking about here. The panel in question, the larger panel in question that the patch panels are designed to repair, is on your screen there. This is an image from the factory repair, factory workshop manual, but it's the exact same image that you'll see in the factory parts catalog. And what we're talking about here is part 98 on that image. I've circled the entire panel in red, more or less circled, and the area that the patch panel is meant to replace is roughly circled in green there at the back. I did not know at the time that I started tearing apart my GT6 that all of that was of a piece. That entire panel covers the rear of the car from the front of the rear wheel arch, or what we Americans often call the rear tub, and runs all the way back to the taillights and bumper. Here's an image from my own GT6. You can see the seam there, ahead of the wheel, just ahead of that triangular shaped, roughly triangular shaped hole. And you can see that that panel extends all the way back to the tail lights and the bumper. And note that the outer wheel arch is part of that. In fact, the factory workshop manual calls that entire panel the outer wheel arch panel, or the wheel arch panel. So it is a fairly flat piece that runs from, again, just ahead of the wheel all the way back to the back of the car, and includes that wheel arch, that flare that comes out and attaches to the wing. So that is all one piece. I did not realize that when I started tearing apart the car. Now, the patch panels that I am discussing here are available through a variety of different vendors. I got mine from Spitbits, I think probably in the summer of 2020, somewhere in there. The part numbers are on there. Moss offers the exact same part, and Rimmer Brothers offers the exact same parts as well. So those just happen to be three major vendors where I could go online and they had images of the parts, and so I was highly confident that they're selling the exact repair panels that I'm using, and I'm confident that the repair panels I'm using are the only ones available on the market for the early Spitfires and GT6s, the so-called, again, round tail cars. Here's just a quick screen grab from the video I'm about to show you, and this is what the repair panels look like in general. Now, I went ahead and recorded a quick video sort of comparing the original inner rear panels that I cut from my GT6 with the replacement panels. I'm gonna go ahead and show you that video now, and then I'll do some cleanup work on the other side. All right, let's do a quick comparison here. Original versus reproduction. At the top here are the pieces of the rear inner strengthener from my GT6. And at the bottom are the reproduction patch panels that I purchased several years ago. I'm going to talk about some of the differences here, some of the things that are going to have to be worked on. Let's start with the originals. So obviously here on the right is the panel from the right hand side of the car, and on the left the panel from the left hand side of the car. I cut both of these out several weeks ago. The right hand side was far and away the worst. It was very crumpled. It looks much straighter now because I tried to straighten it out a little bit. But when I pulled it off the car, it was very crumpled, obviously, with all the accident damage. A lot of rust occurred. Very crusty, very nasty, very out of shape. The left-hand side is in much better shape. Probably could have salvaged more of this, but it definitely has issues. You can see in the upper right hand corner where the tail lamp is that it's torn, and obviously the accident damage allowed a lot of water to enter and sit along the bottom. It's very crusty and rusty at the bottom, especially that forward edge at the bottom really rotted out, so very poor shape there. The reproduction panels, you can kind of tell from looking at them, if you spent any time looking at the originals, that they're not the best. You can probably just glance at them and tell they're going to require a little bit of work. One of the key differences between my originals and these reproduction panels actually involve these holes. There is a round hole and a rectangular hole. There's one here and there's one here, and that's the case on both of the reproduction panels, both the right hand and left hand side. I assume that these holes are associated with emissions plumbing for the very late Spitfire Mark III and GT6 Plus. I don't know that for sure. I haven't looked into it carefully enough to say that for sure, so that's speculation on my part. There's also, notice here, you've got this is raised, and then it flattens out here around these holes. If you look at my original, it doesn't have any of the holes there. My car was built in August of 1968. doesn't have those holes, and also there's no flat spot in here, as we see with the holes here. So those are some differences that I'm going to have to decide whether I want to just live with them or try to modify these reproduction panels to make them more like the original. In an ideal world, I would make the modifications to make them as much like the original as possible, but in the real world there's a complicated calculus, because I actually would like to finish the car at some point, and the more time I spend with details like that, the further off the completion date is, and obviously still have a massive amount of work to do. The more important problem with the reproduction panels, you can kind of see that some of these shapes are a little bit blobby, especially compared with what's intact from the originals. The shapes are a little crisper on the originals. You have to account for some of the warping and distortion from the accident damage in here, but at any rate, these are a little bit blobby. But more important than that, we have this area here where there's a strengthener for the spring bar for the bumper. It's spot welded in. Let's see, I think I have that upside down. There we go. All right. So it's in here like this and fits nicely in this channel. Well, the reproduction, the channel here is not nearly as wide. I think that on this side it can be made to fit. It's going to require some modifications. I'll have to do some bending, but I think it probably can work here. This one, however, is a different story. You can see how incredibly narrow it is here. This is not going to fit down in there really over here. So there's a good bit of work to be done with that. It's not even consistent from side to side. I think this is wider than this. This is absurdly narrow. This is a little bit better, but still pretty narrow. And again, the way that these are pressed is just not very clean. But anyway, that's the story right now. Lots of work to be done. I'm going to have to take some decisions about how I'm going to approach it, but wanted to go ahead and establish some of the differences here between the original panels on my car and the reproductions that I have purchased. So that was a hastily made video, unscripted. I think I covered most of the things that I wanted to cover. I mentioned several times in that video that the shapes that are pressed in the panels are a bit blobby. I could have also mentioned that the holes are not cut very cleanly in the panels. The one good thing about those panels, and it's a very important thing, is that when I put them up against the Heritage rear wings that I purchased, they fit the overall shape really nicely, and that obviously is extremely important, especially if you are looking to repair that part of the car and you don't want to go to the trouble of cutting out and trying to reproduce the original in exact detail. Takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. I see people on YouTube do it, and I think that's great and amazing. I mean, I see some really amazing work out there, but I definitely need to take some shortcuts. I speculated on that video about the emissions plumbing, and that's because I knew off the top of my head about the fuel overflow tank that was installed in that left-hand corner of Spitfire Mark IIIs and GT6 Pluses for the 1970 model year. I just didn't have the details about how everything attaches, and I did some research, and I can't really find anything in tremendous detail. I can find the basic diagram of the emissions plumbing, but it doesn't show in detail how it attaches. I even consulted this little service training notes booklet on emission systems, and it generally has all of the diagrams that other things have. It focuses predominantly on carburation, but it does talk about crankcase breathing and the larger emissions control systems. But again, it doesn't provide details about exact attachment points for any of the cars really. But the Spitfires and GT6s I'm talking about, it doesn't provide any of those kinds of details. However, I did have some clues to go on top of knowing that there is a fuel overflow tank. Let me check this book really quickly and make sure I'm using the correct terminology here. So number 8, overflow tank, yes, fuel overflow tank. So I was aware of that, and I was pretty confident that the attachment points were represented by the holes in my patch panels. I did go and look at, first of all, I did have some fragments of those panels from a 1970. I have these roofline patch panels that were supplied to me by a Triumph enthusiast in an online community. He's very generous. He sold them to me for a very fair price. He was just trying to salvage the parts of a pretty rotten 1970 GT6 that he had out in his yard, and sent them on to me for, like I said, a very fair price. But the way the panels were cut out, I did end up having some remnants of the rear portion of these inner rear panels. And when you look at these, I can see the holes. There they are on one panel, and here's an example on the other. Now, unlike my replacement patch panels where the holes are in the exact same place on both panels, from what I can tell from these fragments, they were in different places on the different sides. But anyway, that is the information that I had at my disposal. It's the only panel that I had in my hands that I could look at from a 1970. I did go in and consult the Mark III factory parts catalog, and I see that the fuel overflow tanks attachment point seems to take a J-clip or a J-type fix nut and a set screw, and that makes perfect sense in terms of how those holes are punched in the panels. So I am confident that those holes are related to 1970 model year emissions needs. I don't know if any of the earlier cars had anything. I know they wouldn't have had any of the emissions type plumbing or anything like that, but I don't know if there was any need for any attachment points with those or not. So just, again, this is speculation on my part, but I think those holes are related, strictly speaking, to the emissions equipment for the 1970 model year. If anybody knows anything otherwise, please reach out and let me know. If it had been more important to my overall analysis, I would have asked online and tried to get definitive word. I know there are people out there who could tell me for sure about those attachment points. But my overall purpose for this video is really to compare my original panels from my car with the repair panels that are generally out there on the marketplace, and hopefully along the way provide some images, descriptions, and so forth and so on that will be helpful to anybody out there who is considering purchasing these repair panels. Whether you happen to be restoring a Spitfire Mark 1 or a Spitfire Mark 2 or a GT6 Plus, whatever the case may be. Hopefully from this video you get a sense about the features of the panels and their overall quality. So I'm going to wrap up this video here. If you like this content, please consider liking the video. That is helpful. And if you like this kind of content in general, please consider subscribing. I have several additional videos in the works. I have no idea exactly how long it will take me to get them out. Of course, one of the things I'm working on is the broader update on my GT6 project, and I really do hope to get that out much sooner than later. I also have something offbeat which probably should come out fairly soon. I just need to carve out the time to get it done. Thanks for watching the video. Till next time.